Hello and welcome to Americana X Newswatch. I'm Greg D, broadcasting to you straight from Los Angeles, California. Today on the Newswatch, we're talking primarily about one big story today. It happened over the weekend. It was a shooting of two Los Angeles police officers and sort of the byproduct of that event. In some cases, the craziness of celebrating a shooting of our law enforcement. We'll get to that in today's episode. Then I want to talk a little bit about my commentary about the other Americans in all of our major American cities that are not rioting. You know, all the people that don't get covered in the news. And then lastly, I want to talk about the great political realigning that mainstream media is scared to talk about. And I'll wrap up a little bit with just talking a little bit about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For those of you that don't know, I'll briefly explain it. At any rate, this is the Newswatch news commentary show that brings you a common sense perspective to our weekly news cycle. This show is for conservatives that care about what's going on behind the sensationalized headlines. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're new to the show, welcome for the first time. You know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe. Also, share this video on whatever platform you're watching it on to your friends so that we can continue to promote positive Christian conservative values to make America a greater place. All right, first story. The Compton shooting of two Los Angeles police officers and how that's being celebrated right now. You know, there's a lot of other commentators out there that have already covered this extensively. If you're watching my show, I'm assuming that you've already seen this in the news cycle if you're following this kind of stuff. I will do a brief overview of what happened, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what happened. I'm going to get to the commentary as quick as I can. So for those of you that have not heard about this happening in Los Angeles, over the weekend, there were two Los Angeles police officers that were shot unprovoked by a young black assailant basically at point blank range while they sat in their police cruiser. Here's a shot that they had on a security camera. And this unsettling event, like I said, it was unprovoked. So we have an unprovoked shooting of our law enforcement officers. This is really a new level. You know, we've seen a lot of unrest. We've seen a lot of people that have been whipped up into a frenzy in the last few months around the subject of police brutality. And then we've seen these, you know, the surgence of these different groups that have come to the fore. And now we're seeing this new kind of brazen, this new kind of bold action, criminal action, that's now become, in essence, someone that thinks they are so in the right, casting the police officers as these racist, negative, just evil people. They think that they have the right to go up and shoot them right in the face in point blank range. And the black citizens that witnessed this event, I guess the people that live in Compton, immediately made videos on their phones showing their support for the shooter and celebrating the police being shot. It goes a step further. Also in the report of this story, when the ambulance tried to take the police officers to the hospital, there were protesters, loosely using that word. There were people standing outside the hospital, not allowing the ambulance to come in. And some of the people were shouting, chanting that they wanted the police to die. What we're seeing here is a full blooming of what happens when you create a narrative that all police are bad. I remember when I was here in Los Angeles and when there was a lot of protesting, so to speak, / rioting going on in our neighborhoods here, you would see, anywhere you would see spray painted on the walls or on the pavement, BLM, then you would also see right next to that, ACAB. And I'll let you, Google that if you don't know what that means. But basically, I'm going to do the PG rated version. All cops are bad. But there's another word for B. But what's really disturbing about that is the insistence by the news that there's some sort of, it's okay that all these people have been doing this looting and rioting, and that's been propped up for some time now. There's been a lot of confusion around who the good guys are, who the bad guys are. If you've got people pushing this concept of ACAB, all cops are bad, all cops, doesn't matter who they are, they're all bad, and we sell that to any segment of our society, let alone trying to wholesale the whole thing to everybody in our society, and it's not true. If it's not true, there's a lot of negative effects that come from that. One of them being a person thinking that they are, in essence, in the right to run up alongside a police car, shoot people, and then have bystanders or witnesses videotaping themselves right after witnessing it and celebrating that action. This is a sign of an unhealthy society. We craft a narrative over many years that our police are systemically racist and evil. That's been what's, there's other people that have talked about this recently, but I think it's worth mentioning here. For the last 20, 30 plus years, we've been creating very specific narratives through our entertainment. And a lot of our young people that are raised in pretty much any part of our society, but particularly in lower middle class or working poor neighborhoods or in our poverty-stricken areas, they're raised more by entertainment than they are by reality. Or they're raised more by entertainment than they are by the education system. And in many cases, the education system's not doing enough to refute the narrative that these kids are being sold anyways through their entertainment. So again and again, you'll have the police being represented as the bad guy in the TV show. For the plot twist at the end of the movie, it was the police officer that was the bad guy all along. Or you have, Denzel Washington's character in Training Day. All cops in LA, they're that guy. They're that evil. That's the guy you got to watch out for. So they flip it all around. The criminals, the people that actually are arson, theft, destruction, rape, beating people up, murder, or attempted murder, all these things get excused because they're the good guys. At least that's the narrative that's been getting spun. Who's spinning that? Why would that be the narrative? Greg, why? What are you talking about? That's not happening. Why would you even say that that's a narrative that's being spun? The reason why that narrative is being spun, particularly by our media and pushed very hard by our media, is because it helps them reach their political ends. They're very cynical people. They do not care. It's all about maintaining the narrative. For what? Why would they need to maintain a narrative, Greg? Why is that important? They're maintaining a narrative because it is all about them being in power. It is a really cynical power grab. They need to keep people, particular people in our lower income areas in our cities, spinning down at the bottom. They need to keep them down there in that lower consciousness, thinking about how they're a victim and how the world's against them and how there's this big evil system that explains why they can never get out of the situation they're in. And I'm going to get back to that here by the end of this episode. I'm going to be talking about a psychological model that we can use to sort of, it's not perfect. It's just another model created by a man, but it does help to identify and begin to name some of the things that are happening here. But this is what I wanted to do. We have a generation of young Americans raised more by the narrative than they are by reality. And at this point, a lot of the other, I guess you say, news commentators, pundits, they might talk about how Marxism can be used to explain this. And while I agree with them, basically the concept of Marxism, when you boil it all down, it's the victim class versus the overclass, or it's the oppressed versus the oppressors. And you're pitting these groups of people against each other. And as long as you can kind of keep that narrative going, then you can keep the people that are in the oppressed class sort of under your control. You can get them to sort of carry out your political ends. Ultimately, it's you prop up a narrative, you sell the narrative to the people so that you can stay in power and you can prop up your own power. And that's what that's just boiling down the entire liberal Democrat agenda down into like a very succinct way of describing it. But rather than me talking about that, because I feel like that gets covered a lot, I'd like to pivot from this point here, and I'd like to talk a little bit about a slightly different perspective about what might be fueling this. It's a psychological model that was created by a guy named Abraham Maslow. It's called the Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. Now, like I said, it's imperfect, okay? He even admitted himself when he was writing about this, making books and all that stuff, that it's not a airtight, foolproof, perfect way of describing human needs and how we move from one set of needs to another and back again. But rather, these are more like waypoints. These are more like signposts for us to kind of see a way of describing reality that helps us sort of explain what's going on. And that's what I want to look at here. But before I do that, I'd like to talk just for a moment about the other Americans, the people that aren't in the news cycle. These are the unsung heroes of America. These are the people in all of our major cities, whether it's Portland, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, et cetera, on and on and on, right? These are the people that are pursuing life, liberty, and happiness to the best they can as law-abiding citizens of America. They're paying taxes. They're promoting a healthy, happy community around them. I want to talk about those people for a second. Do their lives matter? Or do just the shrieking, angry leftists' lives matter? That's the question. Because the way the media treats it, it's as if the only people that exist right now are these poor, put-upon protester people. That's actually a fairly small percentage of people living in these communities. They're yelling very loudly. They are getting their liberal leaders to kowtow to them because, in essence, there's like an ecosystem that's built between these people that are doing the protesting and the liberal elites that have been stoking the fires of political unrest. Now, I think I made another video last week where I talked a little bit about how it's getting away from the liberal elites a little bit. It's getting out of their control at this point. So they're trying to figure out how to pull the reins back in on this thing because it's run amok. But that's what rioting and violence and crime and murder, that's what that does. It doesn't have you don't put controls on that. You inspire it. If you're a liberal, that's the activity you want. You want to see unrest right now because you want the country to feel that there's a narrative that you're pushing that President Trump's such a bad guy, you got to vote him out of office. That's what they want to do. That's what they've been pushing. But it's very difficult to put the, Pandora only comes out of the box. Pandora doesn't go back in the box. So we have all the local politicians in these liberal-run cities catering to this minority liberal mob that are bullying the cities they occupy. But what about the average citizens in our cities? Don't they deserve representation? They may not be making a lot of noise, right? At least noise that gets covered on the news. They may not be carrying out violent and destructive acts to push their agenda. But just because they're not screeching doesn't mean they don't also deserve representation and to be cared for by our government. Normal, average people have rights too. In fact, the Constitution, you can make an argument, was written for the law-abiding citizens that have a good sense of civility. The people that do want to hold up our society and want to have a better America and want to fight the good fight of improving whatever it is that's broken or not working in our society. These people are out there. One thought I had here is, we have so many politicians now across all of our major cities in America that, in essence, have been defending the criminals, defending the people that are in the streets, destroying other people's property, LARPing, pretending to own the property like we saw in the Chaz thing, taking out violence, pretending to be a police force, in some cases murdering other people. And then we have Donald Trump, who's a politician that's fighting for all the other citizens of the country. When it comes to the news and what they're covering, Donald Trump can't be the only politician fighting for the average citizens of America. Is there any better proof for why we need to elect Republican representation to take over all the liberal-run cities in America? That's the question I have for you guys that are watching this right now. We need more adults in the room, you guys. Time to bring some civility back to the American cities. Let's sweep this election and let mature adults run our cities again. Sadly, the only mature adults we seem to have in politics right now are all Republicans. I can't point to one liberal Democrat that isn't acting like a petulant, childish, spoiled, fully partisan person. Every Democrat, every major city that's governing right now is really just a disgusting politician. They would rather focus on partisan games than actually helping people. And you guys know this. What I'm saying here is not something new or shocking. It's really obvious if you just watch the news and you're not ideologically possessed yourself. But there is something positive here. There is a silver lining. There is a political realignment that is beginning to take place right now. That brings me to my last story. We used to have certain assumptions about how the Republicans and the Democrats approached things, right? Who the Republicans represented, who the Democrats represented. But it is interesting to see how all that's been getting shaken up in recent times, particularly in the last year. I think it probably started really in earnest about 4 years ago, where you could really visibly see how there was a new realigning happening. But it's become more and more stark as we've gone along. And this is the great political realigning that the mainstream media is scared to talk about. Why are they scared to talk about it? Why would I say that about the mainstream media? Why wouldn't they just talk openly about how there's a realigning in our parties? It's because it threatens their grip that they have in swaying the public with their narrative. Thereby, it's like a threatening to their power. If their power is being threatened and they're losing grip on the narrative over the people that they used to have more control over, that's going to make the mainstream media freak, and it makes them not want to cover this kind of stuff. So what is this political realigning that I'm talking about? You may have seen this. I'm going to articulate it in my way. This might be something that, other commentators have covered in one way, shape, or form. There used to be a time, this is, a couple of decades ago now, a time when Republican Party was known as the rich white people's party. And I think sometimes the mainstream media still tries to push that narrative, but it's getting weaker and it's getting harder to push because of the populist orientation of the Republican Party today. You know, you look at who Donald Trump's, if you look at any of the footage from any of Donald Trump's rallies, see a great swath of everybody there, right? It's got a real populist vibe. You don't just see a bunch of, you know, hoity-toity, fuddy-duddy rich people in the audience, a bunch of gray-haired, you know, I'm an investor, you know. No, that's you are seeing average people, and that's the middle class, you know, or lower middle class, working poor. That's making up a large part of the Republican Party today. When that group used to be more like your union workers, that would have been more on the Democrat side. Well, the Democrat Party is catering now mostly to its richest extreme elites. The element of its base, this is ultimately the people that Democrats are trying to make happy. You know, so the realignment that's happened here is the Republicans equals middle class, working class, and the Democrats equals rich elites. And why do I say that? Why do I say Democrats, the rich elites? Like, why am I tying those together? That brings me to my next point here that I'd like to share with you. It's this concept of how we can use a psychological model. This is from many years ago. You know, you can, if you just want the Cliff Notes version of Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, just check it out on Wikipedia. You can just read through it real quick. But there's also books about this, and there's actually been other psychological models that are worded differently and they describe it differently. So you can look at those if you want to. I'm using this one because it's very popular. It's been sort of revised many times, so it's got some validity, at least in the psychological circles. But this is what I want to do. I want to go through this just slightly, and I'm going to use this to describe how the liberals are now a party for the rich elite and pretty much don't care about anybody else. Everybody else, if you're a Democrat, you're just a tool to prop up power for your rich elite overlords. So for those of you that have never seen the Abraham Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs before, this is what it looks like right here. And so basically what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to go through this really quick with you. And then I want to just highlight a couple of important components that we can use to sort of describe what's going on. And I'll even relate this back to the first story we were covering too. So we'll bring this full circle. Basically, at the bottom of the pyramid of Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, you'll see that it talks about physiological needs. This is health, food, water, shelter. So if you don't get anywhere else, is like and you know, if you look at like caveman times, everybody's sort of born into that phase. That's why it's the largest base of the pyramid, because everybody's there when they come out of the womb. Everybody gets that. If you get those needs covered, and this is according to Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, then you move on to safety and security. Okay? So yeah, you've pretty much everybody covers the, I got shelter, I got food, I got water. Then you think about personal security, emotional security, financial security. Pretty much everybody in America makes it to that level too. You know, some people solve these problems for themselves. They're like in a high crime area. Like, let's look at Compton, for instance. You know, you've got people that are living in that area where a lot of their thoughts and their day-to-day is preoccupied with issues of just basic safety and security for themselves. And so if you're really preoccupied in America or anywhere else in the world with safety and security, it's difficult for you to move up to the next level. But once you do sort of feel like, okay, I have my basic emotional needs and personal security, emotional security, personal security covered, then you move on to the next level in Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. Friendship, intimacy, family. Most people make it to this level, right? Let's look at, you know, our lower income communities again. Use this as an example. If they don't have a father in the home, or if they don't have a strong family, they'll turn to gangs. That will become their friendships, their intimacy, their family. That's why it becomes difficult for those people to escape a certain place where they're operating, because they're stuck down at that level. And then, the two levels above that, self-esteem. It's a need for people to get to the self-esteem level. Not everybody makes it to this level, but self-esteem, basically ego needs, status, importance, respect from others. Most people need to feel respected. This includes the need to have self-esteem and self-respect. And a lot of people, they make it there, but then that may be the furthest they make it up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But the goal, at least the way that Maslow described it, is we should be trying to get everyone to move all the way up to the highest level, which is self-actualization. This is, where you have partner acquisition, where you think about somebody other than yourself, where you become a parent, you pursue goals. This is where existential pursuits would fall into, life purpose. And this is where we have a real deviation in America. We have our upper class people in America that do make it to that level, where we have some communities within America that do not make it to that sort of existential struggle level. And this is where I think that we can relate it to what's going on right now. We can describe what's happening on a community level for some of these people. I'm just going to read a quote here from Maslow's description of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. To pursue intrinsic motivation, higher up Maslow's hierarchy, so to pursue existential issues, physiological needs must be met first. This means that if a human is struggling to meet their physiological needs, then they are unlikely to intrinsically pursue safety, belongingness, self-esteem, and then self-actualization. Okay? So we have communities of people that are very frustrated, struggling at the bottom levels of this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, making it impossible for them to ever really feel like, and imagine if you are, and maybe you are in this position right now, you're watching this video right now and you resonate with this. You're operating at that very low level of, I'm really just focused on baseline physiological needs being met. If I can get that done, that makes my day. It makes it impossible for that person to then prioritize existential. Now, some people, they do, there's some artists, they'll live on the street and they'll have a difficult time covering their basic physiological needs, but they'll still have this intrinsic need for purpose. So they'll be like an artist painting on the street, trying to reach for, but it's very, very difficult for them. It's difficult if you don't have certain areas of life managed to jump to a higher level. And that's basically what Maslow's getting at here. And sometimes people have to move back and forth. Sometimes they have to prioritize going back further down the hierarchy of needs, but then go back to the top. Anyways, I don't want to get too tripped up on that. What I want to talk about is this. I want to make a point here. Some communities in America are dealing more with lower level problems in their hierarchy of needs. And you can see how some of the social unrest that's being inspired in our country is being sold to. Here's where certain narratives get sold and really catch on, because they appeal to people at different points, all different points of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If we just use that as a psychological example, this is what I mean by that. There are people at the top. Maybe by the time they were a teenager, they were raised in a wealthy family. They had all their basic needs met. They went from teenager to college very easily in the transition because their parents were very wealthy. So they had all their basic needs covered. They had all of their family, friendship needs covered. And even as they were a teenager becoming a college student, they could turn their attention to existential issues or things of life purpose, sort of the things at the top of this hierarchy of needs. So by the time they're getting out of college, these are our people. This is the part of society where, let's say they go into politics, for instance. young politician, they get into that game, they've already got all these other needs covered. In fact, maybe they have a trust fund. Maybe their parents are covering everything. So they can really just focus on the dream of their existential struggle, whatever that's going to be. I'm going to fight for my political purpose. And because I come from a rich family, it makes it easy for me just to focus all day long on the existential issues of our time. So when they come upon a narrative like Black Lives Matter, they see that differently than the way someone at the bottom of this hierarchy of needs would see it. Someone that's dealing with just their basic physiological issues. Now here's sort of the silver bullet of how Black Lives Matter, or how Marxist philosophy can appeal to both of these groups. You see, all of the political issues of the liberal agenda benefits those that are these liberal elites that are basically kind of operating at this level of, if I generate enough of a narrative that's negative and casts America as a negative place, then I can get these other people that are, in essence, not as self-aware as I am, not as self-actualized, and I can use them as a foot soldier or as a tool for me to stay in power. And that is where you get this kind of like movement that appeals to all different levels, and why it takes a grip in our society like it does. If it only appealed to the lowest level of people, it might not capture the imagination of a country. 50% of a country anyways. And that's what I'm getting at here. If we apply this to the first story that I was talking about here today, and we cast that story and the events of that story in light of looking at it through the lens of physiological needs moving all the way up to self-actualization, the people that are in these communities that are basically brainwashed into believing that all of our cops are bad when there is no proof, there is no physical proof that our police are evil or racist or against all people. In fact, there's a lot of proof to the contrary, that on the whole, our police want to serve our communities. They love the people in their community. They live in those communities. They actually are there to serve. At any rate, you can see how the narrative gets sold to this group of people that are living in Compton, Los Angeles, California. They see it through the lens of, I'm dealing day to day with mostly physiological, up to maybe like friendship, so security and then friendship, but they're not thinking much higher up. They're not thinking about like what this means at an existential level. But their political overlords that are using them as a tool are selling them through the media and through the entertainment and through our education system a steady diet of police are bad, police are bad, police are bad, to keep those people ginned up, to keep them spinning out, because it gives them an excuse for why their experience is as bad as it is. They'll never move out of that experience, and now they've got an excuse for why they'll never move out of that experience. While some communities in America are living with tons of affluence and they're born into that experience, making it easy for them to perpetuate that, we also have places in America that are dealing with just living at that physiological level, just trying to meet physiological needs. And that is why we're seeing this shakeup and this type of realignment within the Democrat Party, particularly, but also on the Republican side, and why we're seeing this general realignment across the board. Middle class and lower middle class people are being abandoned by the Democrat Party because they are, it is getting more difficult to sell them the narrative when there is something that says, hey guys, remember the American dream? You may not be the victim that the Democrats have been trying to sell you are. You might be able to do something about this. You live in a free country. This is a great place. You may be able to progressively meet your own needs and then move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs until you're at the self-actualization level yourself. It might take you a little bit longer. You know, if you're living in the middle class or lower middle class. But this is something you need to take personal responsibility for. That's the Republican conservative side describing how you might work your way out of this. Okay, I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. I want to stay back on the main subject. You know, so there are liberal elites pushing the narrative to promote their own power grab. And then there are the desperate lower class people hoping that if they align themselves with this thing, it's going to benefit them in the end. So in a weird way, all these people that are creating this unrest in our cities across America, they think they're doing something good. They think that there is ultimately a positive end to all of this unrest. Violence, chaos, burning, arson, theft, murder, literal murder of other people. They actually think there's a good end to that. What they don't realize is the whole model that they are subscribing to is one based on, one, lies, and the lies inspire the narrative. The narrative, in turn, creates power for a small number of people at the top. And the people at the bottom do not realize how much they're being used by their liberal elite overlords. All right, so that is what I've got for today's show here on Americana X Newswatch. What I'd like to encourage you guys to do out there, you know, Republicans, I know you guys are already going to vote in November for probably a straight Republican ticket at this point. You're probably so sick of it, like I am, watching what's been happening in our media and feeling almost helpless to see how our liberal-run cities are just being run down so hard. But to the Democrats out there that do have a semblance of reason and logic, I'd like to encourage you. It may be time to promote conservative leadership in some of our major cities. Hey, what do you have to lose? How much worse can your city in America get than having it burned to the ground? I mean, look what's happening in New York. How much worse can New York get? So, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today. If you haven't yet, like, comment, subscribe. Also, share this out on whatever platform you're watching it on. I've been Greg D. This has been Americana X Newswatch. We'll see you next time.